Bismillah. Alhamdulillah. Bismillah wa salam ala rasulillahi kareem. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah nahmadahu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruh wa nu'minu bihi wa natawakkal alayhi wa na'udhu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. أما بعد. الحمد لله. الحمد لله ثم الحمد لله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. This is Samir, Uncle Samir, for the New Muslim Institute. Alhamdulillah, this is discussion about Eid. I actually had attempted to do a video recording during the beginning of Ramadan, around Ramadan, and it didn't get published when I tried to publish it, and had some problems, and I just never got around to doing another one. Now Eid is upon us again. It is time for Eid al-Adha, and I'm just getting around to making some time. I'm actually supposed to be doing something else, but making some time right now to record this video, because some may already be knowing, I don't know whether or not, because some go along with the international sighting, so I don't know if today or not there's been any discussion as to whether or not the moon had been sighted in Saudi Arabia or not. But this is to explain to my students, as well as to those others who wish to know, why there may be different Eid days, and why can't we all just get along? Why can't we all just have the same Eid day? I originally, in my original recording, I went into some of the history of that. I don't know, I might get back to that and give some idea as to some of the problems that existed here, or does exist here in North America, and I think actually I should do that. You know, when, especially here, and nowadays, alhamdulillah, by the grace and mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I have been within the Muslim community and around the Muslim community for close to 40 years. And this is the Sunni Muslim community, because my introduction to Islam with my Sheikh Ibrahim Abu Raqib, the Raqib Ismail, was with Sunni Islam. I never came through the nation or anything of that nature. I met him in 1969, shortly before his son Raqib, the Raqib, was born, and so I always was around Sunni Islam. I knew about Sunni Islam before I knew about the Nation of Islam. Anyway, that being said, the Muslims originally, in coming from other countries in North America, in the old days, we used to see in the early 70s and the mid 70s and so forth, what used to happen was many of the Muslims who came from various countries around the world, who were now finding themselves present in North America, and in those days there were not any real national organizations as we have today. I think the MSA, which is one of the first and major organizations, which now the parent corporation organization calls itself ISNA, the Islamic Society of North America, originally started as the Muslim Students Association, which was in Gary, Indiana, somewhere I believe in the near the end of the 60s, or maybe the very early 70s. I'm not sure exactly around the date, but it was not until much around the late 70s as they started to expand to various colleges as an organization all over the country, and eventually grew into the parent organization that we know today as ISNA, which, as I said, was one of the first major national organizations with Muslims. Anyhow, the thing was that as Muslims began to come to North America from various countries, when it came time for Ramadan and eventually Eid al-Adha, which were the only times that Muslims were really concerned with a Hijra calendar, they looked to their parent country, their country from which they came. They would call on the telephone back home, and the people back home would tell them, oh, it's Ramadan, or tomorrow the moon was sighted and we're starting to fast tomorrow. So then therefore those people began to follow what was being done from their parent countries, because there was no organization for sighting the moon, and many communities didn't do that very well. Some indigenous communities were sighting the moon back in those days, but of course with a lot of the fitna from the Nation of Islam, who used to do Ramadan all the time in December, no matter what, you know, people were not used to that particular system. And the ambiguity, the uncertainty of the date, always in the beginning throws a lot of people off. So you had other people who went along with the calendar, who started going along with whatever the calendar is. People, different Islamic masjids, organizations, and some would start making Islamic calendars, and they would get the information in terms of the approximation of the days and the months and so on and so forth from wherever they did. And whatever date was present on the calendars, this is what you will find, that you always had some people in the communities following what was on the calendar no matter what. You know, they wasn't looking to sight the moon because there was this type of ambiguity, and then you had those who were going along with their own present country, wherever that might be in the world. Then you had, you know, a small minority of indigenous Muslims. In the beginning, it was primarily the indigenous Muslims who were looking for the sighting of the moon here in this country, and that was not going with the sighting from another country, and definitely not going with the calculation, since, you know, they already were aware of the sunnah of looking to sight the moon. But still, you started having variants with people sighting the moon, etc., etc. Fast forward, a lot of organizations began to emerge and establish and start looking to sight the moon. And it took a while, but by the mid 80s, early to mid 80s, most of the existing Islamic organizations were going for sighting the moon in North America. I was not going for sighting from various countries. That posed a little bit of a problem, as they were going through the whole country, and America is a big country, and you have 3-hour time zones from east to the west. And so therefore, it became very late at night before some people would be aware whether or not the moon had been sighted in California, seeing that generally you can only sight the moon slightly after the sunset at Maghrib time. So in those days, when Maghrib was here in the East Coast, like 8 o'clock, 8:30, it was not going to be set in California till 11:30 for those who were on the East Coast. Then you had to wait for a few hours more before you became aware whether anybody had sighted the moon or not. So it became very tedious and very arduous, although there was many who, suffered through that, and they felt that's what we needed to do, so that we did. Sometimes we would not be aware of whether or not the moon was sighted in somewhere in United States all the way until Fajr time. People used to stay up until 12, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning waiting to find out, to hear whether it was any confirmation that the moon was sighted or not in California. And so many became frustrated with those kind of situations, and many of the organizations started moving away from that. This is, of course, pre-internet, before the time of the internet. And the only thing they had was telephone. Even a lot of people still had rotary telephones. I know you young folks don't know nothing about that. But anyway, that's what it used to be. I remember myself calling my friends in California a little bit before Fajr time to find out if they had sighted the moon or not. If anybody had any confirmation that they had sighted the moon, so that I could know whether or not to fast that day or not. And this was the case with those who back then were still seeking to sight the moon in North America. Somewhere along the line, I don't know, perhaps in the early 90s, still either, I can't remember, in the early days of the internet, or maybe even before the internet was widely used, I myself went along, started moving with a couple masjids where I might have been located, where they started to go with an international sighting, and started talking about the rulings for being able to accept the sighting no matter who sights it anywhere in the world, etc., etc., etc. And usually it was, of course, pointing to Saudi Arabia. I think to avoid, because I had many days when my children were very little, where we did not do the Eid with the mass majority of the community, because we were a small minority of people who believed in sighting the moon in North America, who were still holding to that. And because of that seeming to be different from the mass majority, I started gravitating towards going with what seemed to be more correct unity of going along with this international sighting, wherever it was sighted. And I moved in that direction as well. And I listened to the evidence that was spouted and talked about, and it seemed logically to make sense. At least for the most part, it seemed to be closer to something that we would be able to all agree upon. And since that's what some of the majority of the communities were gravitating towards, I started to do the same for a while. And I practiced that for a while. I was with that. But it dawned on me, I'm not a scholar and I don't have anything. Even though in this video, inshallah, I'm going to show you some evidence from the hadith and from the opinions from Sheikh bin Baz and Muhammad ibn Uthaymeen, which, if I haven't already put it up there on the screen, when I edit this video, it will be forthcoming if it's not already on there by this particular point of the video, rather than just me spouting off at the mouth, because I ain't nobody. But anyway, inshallah, what started happening was, and I'm glad now, I've been back on the position of only accepting the sighting in the country in which we live. And I've been there for quite some time, that I've come back to that realization. And I did it several years ago, many years ago, maybe before the end of the 90s. It wasn't too many years that I practiced the other